The prison station Koreth 9 hung in the dead space between two dying stars, which, if you asked anyone with functioning taste, was exactly the kind of place you would put something you wanted the universe to forget about. Warden Draxul had been running Koreth 9 for 11 years. 11 years of screaming inmates, malfunctioning gravity coils, and ration paste that smelled like something had already digested it once. He was a Vethori, which meant he stood about 9 feet tall, had 4 arms, a face that looked like someone had tried to sculpt a skull and given up halfway through, and an ego roughly the size of the gas giant the station orbited. He also, as fate would eventually make very clear to him, had absolutely no idea what a human being was actually capable of. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Let us start with the prisoner. Cell Block Omega was the worst section of Koreth 9, which was saying something, because every single section of Koreth 9 was terrible. Omega was reserved for the ones Draxul personally wanted to suffer. The cells were smaller here. The walls were closer. The light strips flickered at irregular intervals, which sounds minor until you have been sitting in near darkness for 6 months, and your brain starts filling in the gaps with things that are not actually there. The prisoner in cell Omega 7 had been there for 8 months. His name was Colt Maren. He was human. He was 34 years old, medium height, with brown hair that had grown long and unkempt, a jaw that had not seen a razor since before his arrest, and eyes the color of old storm clouds. His file said he had been a demolitions engineer before the Interstellar Commerce Authority hired him to oversee controlled explosives work on mining stations along the Vethori border. His file also said he had blown up 3 ICA checkpoints, disabled a Vethori patrol cruiser, and somehow inexplicably escaped from 2 separate maximum security holding facilities before being captured a 3rd time and brought to Koreth 9 in restraints designed for creatures twice his size. The restraints were, Draxul had noted with satisfaction, working perfectly. Thick bands of Koreth alloy, the strongest metal the Vethori had ever developed, locked both of Colt's wrists to the wall behind him. A secondary band crossed his chest. His ankles were bolted to a floor plate. He could sit. He could stand. Barely. He could not walk. He could not reach anything within 3 arm lengths in any direction. Draxul visited him every morning, not because regulations required it, not because he actually needed to check anything, but because Draxul genuinely enjoyed it, which told you quite a lot about Draxul as a person. The morning that everything changed began the way most mornings at Koreth 9 began, which is to say badly and with the faint smell of something burning in Corridor 7. Draxul walked into cell Omega 7 with 2 guards, a datapad under his lower left arm, and the particular expression of a creature who has decided today is going to be fun. His translator implant hummed at the base of his jaw as he looked down at Colt Maren. Colt looked up. He had learned not to say anything first. 8 months had taught him that. "Good morning, prisoner Maren," Draxul said. His voice had the quality of gravel being poured over metal. "You look terrible." "Thank you," Colt said. "I've been working on it." One of the guards made a sound that might have been a laugh. Draxul silenced it with a look. "I have your quarterly review here," Draxul said, tapping the datapad. "The ICA has formally withdrawn your citizenship. Your home station registration has been deleted. You have no legal standing in any jurisdiction currently recognized by the Vethori Accord." Colt said nothing. "Which means," Draxul continued, the words rolling out slowly and deliberately, the way someone might roll out a carpet they wanted you to fully appreciate, "that there is no minimum standard of care I am required to meet. There is no tribunal with authority over your case. There is no appeal mechanism. There is no one, prisoner Maren, who is coming for you." Still nothing from Colt. Draxul leaned down slightly, bringing his face closer. This was the part he liked. This was the moment most inmates broke, when the reality settled in like cold water filling a sealed compartment. "You will be here until you die, and I will be here every single morning to remind you of that. Because I find it, personally, very amusing." He straightened up. He was smiling. The Vethori version of smiling involved showing the secondary row of teeth, which most other species found profoundly upsetting. Colt looked at him for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "You know what I find amusing?" Draxul raised one of his 4 hands in a slow theatrical invitation for Colt to continue. "These chains," Colt said. "The engineer who installed them made a mistake on the left wrist bracket. The load-bearing pin is seated wrong, about 2 millimeters off-center. The alloy is strong, but the mounting point is not. Every time I breathe, I flex slightly. Every slight flex creates micro-stress at the mounting point. 8 months of that, and I would estimate I need about 4 more days before the bracket fails completely. Silence. One of the guards shifted. The other one very carefully did not move. Draxul stared at him. Colt stared back. There was something in his eyes now that had not been there at the beginning of the conversation. Something steady, something almost amused. "You are bluffing," Draxul said. "Maybe," Colt said. "Come back in 4 days and find out." Draxul had the bracket inspected that afternoon. The engineer who did the inspection was a Vethori named Quesil, who had been maintaining Corath 9's containment hardware for 6 years, and had never once found a problem that had not been immediately obvious. Quesil looked at the left wrist bracket for 40 seconds. Then he looked at Draxul. "Well?" Draxul said. Quesil's secondary mouth opened and closed once, which was a Vethori expression of deep discomfort. "There is a seating error on the load-bearing pin. 2, maybe 2.5 millimeters off-center. It is not immediately dangerous, but under sustained micro-stress over an extended period." "How extended?" Quesil did the math, quietly. "Somewhere between 3 and 6 days, he said, depending on the subject's mass and respiratory habits. Draxul stood very still. "Replace it," he said. "Of course." "Immediately." "Understood. And do not tell anyone that a human being spotted a structural flaw in Corath alloy hardware with his eyes." Quesil nodded very quickly and said nothing, which was the wisest thing he did all year. Draxul went back to Colt's cell the next morning. He went alone this time, which the guards noted and did not comment on, because they valued their continued employment. Colt was sitting against the wall with his eyes closed. He opened them when the door opened, looked at Draxul, and waited. "You had your inspection," Draxul said. "I heard someone come in last night," Colt said. "The magnetic seals on the bracket make a specific sound when they disengage. Higher pitch than the original installation. New hardware, probably." Draxul breathed through his nose. "You should not be able to notice things like that. And yet, you are one creature," Draxul said, and the sarcasm in his voice was thick enough to walk on. "One small, unaugmented, biologically unimpressive creature. You have no enhanced senses, no neural modifications, no combat implants. You were not engineered for anything. Your species has been spacefaring for less than 200 years. You are by every metric the Vethori Accord uses to evaluate sentient beings, unremarkable." Colt tilted his head slightly. "You are in chains that cannot be broken. You are in a cell that has never been escaped. You are being held by a station that has been in continuous operation for over a century, and nothing has ever walked out of Omega Block." Draxul's voice rose slowly, not into a shout, but into something worse, something certain and satisfied. "So tell me, Prisoner Maren, what exactly do you think is going to happen? What is your plan? Because I am very curious. I want to hear it. Go on." The silence stretched. Then Colt smiled. It was a small smile. Quiet. Private. The kind of smile a person wears when they know something that you do not, and they have decided not to explain it yet. "I don't have one plan," Colt said. Draxul waited. "I have 17. That was the moment, looking back, that Draxul should have done something different, something smarter. He should have transferred the prisoner, moved him to a different cell, different block, different station entirely. He should have taken the smile seriously. He should have taken the bracket incident seriously. He should have read the full arrest report, specifically the section labeled, in large, attention-getting letters, "Do not allow prolonged sedentary confinement. This subject uses inactivity as preparation." He did not do any of those things. He laughed instead. It was a long, genuine laugh, the kind that comes from real amusement and not performance. He laughed at the absurdity of it. 17 plans. From a chained human in a sealed cell with no tools, no allies, and no legal standing in any jurisdiction. 17, Draxul repeated, still smiling as he left. "Yes, absolutely. I will sleep very soundly tonight knowing that." The door sealed behind him. In the cell, Colt listened to the magnetic lock engage. He counted the seconds of delay before the secondary lock activated. He noted the slight variance from the previous morning. 0.3 seconds longer. That meant the secondary lock mechanism had been serviced recently, probably at the same time the bracket was replaced. Fresh calibration. Fresh calibration meant the timing sensor was running off factory default settings rather than the worn and adjusted ones that had been standard on this block for months. Factory default timing sensors had a known vulnerability. Colt had spent 12 weeks on an ICA station learning to bypass them. That had been 9 years ago. but some things once learned stayed with you the way certain smells stayed with you. Completely, permanently. He filed that away. He moved his left wrist, slowly, in a very specific rotation. The new bracket held perfectly. Of course it did. He was not testing the bracket. He was testing the guard rotation timing, which he could measure by the interval between the sound of Draxul leaving and the next corridor patrol passing his door. 4 minutes and 40 seconds. Same as yesterday. He noted it. He closed his eyes. He went back to thinking. 3 levels up, in the administrative section of Corinth 9, a junior processing officer named Breck was going through the prisoner intake files from the last 18 months, when he found something that made him stop. He read it twice. He read it a third time. Then he pulled up the secondary file attached to Colt Maren's arrest record, the one that required a senior clearance to open, which Breck technically did not have, but the clearance system had been glitching since Tuesday, and the security partition was currently behaving more like a suggestion than an actual barrier. The secondary file was a behavioral assessment compiled by 3 separate ICA intelligence officers after Colt's second escape. The summary read, "Subject demonstrates extraordinary capacity for environmental analysis under extreme stress. Escape attempts to date have not relied on physical strength, external assistance, or improvised weaponry. Both prior escapes were achieved through the subject's systematic observation and exploitation of procedural and mechanical patterns within his containment environment. Estimated planning horizon for escape attempt 2 was approximately 6 months. Subject is considered most dangerous not during active confrontation but during extended inactivity, when observational and analytical activities are at maximum." At the bottom underlined, someone had added in handwriting, "Do not give this man time to think." Breck stared at the screen. Then he looked at the date Colt Maren had been placed in solitary confinement in cell Omega 7, 8 months ago. Breck made a sound that was not quite a word and reached for his comm unit to call the warden. The comm unit was busy. It was in fact going to stay busy for the next several hours because Draxul was in a long administrative call about the station's upcoming resource audit and had left instructions not to be disturbed. Breck sat at his desk. He looked at the file. He pulled up the security feed for cell Omega 7. Colt Maren was sitting against the wall with his eyes closed, still, quiet, perfectly calm. Breck had been working at a prison for 4 years. He had seen many prisoners in their cells. He knew what a person looked like when they had given up. He knew what a person looked like when they were waiting. Colt Maren was not sitting still because he had given up. Breck was suddenly, profoundly certain of that. He tried the comm again. Still busy. On the security feed, Colt opened his eyes, looked directly at the camera, and then looked away again. Breck's skin, which was a pale grey-blue in the way of his species, went a shade paler. It was almost certainly a coincidence. Almost certainly. Day 247 of Colt Maren's stay at Corinth 9 began the same way every other day had begun, which is to say with the lights flickering on at 0600 station time, the distant hum of the ventilation system cycling through its morning pressure equalization, and the faint metallic groan of the station hull adjusting to the thermal expansion caused by the nearer of the 2 dying stars outside. Most prisoners found that groan unsettling. Colt found it useful. It happened at the same time every morning, give or take 11 seconds, and it lasted between 4 and 7 seconds depending on the current orbital position of the station. The variance was measurable, the pattern was consistent, and the reason Colt cared about any of this was that during the hull groan, the vibration running through the floor and walls created approximately 0.4 seconds of interference in the magnetic containment sensors built into the cell floor, not enough to trigger an alert, not enough to cause any actual failure in any system, but enough, if you timed it precisely and knew exactly what you were doing, to perform one very specific action without the motion sensors registering it. He had been testing this for 6 weeks. Today was not the day he acted on it, but today was the day he confirmed the final measurement he needed. The hull groaned. Colt moved his right ankle, precisely, deliberately, a rotation of exactly 30 degrees. The floor sensor did not log it. He filed that away. He closed his eyes again. Up in the administrative section, Breck had spent the previous night compiling everything he could find on Colt Maren, which was more than he expected and less than he needed, and had arrived at his station 2 hours early specifically to try reaching Draxul before the morning rounds began. He succeeded on the 3rd attempt. "Warden," Breck said, pulling up his notes. "What is it?" Draxul sounded like a creature who had slept fine and was mildly annoyed at being reminded that other creatures existed. The human in Omega-7. I found a secondary behavioral file from the ICA, a senior clearance document. And he is not what the primary arrest file describes. The ICA classification has him listed as a demolitions engineer with a history of opportunistic escape behavior, but the behavioral assessment tells a completely different story. His first escape from ICA custody took 8 weeks to plan and executed without a single improvised tool. His second escape from a maximum security facility took 6 months to plan and left 4 containment systems completely non-functional in a sequence that the ICA's own engineers described as, and I am quoting directly here, a masterclass in cascading mechanical failure. A pause. He has been in Omega-7 for 8 months, Breck said. The pause on Draxul's end stretched longer this time. Bring the file to my office, Draxul said. His voice had changed. The mild annoyance was gone. Something else had replaced it. Something that, in a different creature, might have been called the early stages of concern. Draxul read the behavioral file in 7 minutes, which was fast for a document that long. He read the handwritten note at the bottom twice. Then he set the datapad down and looked at Breck. Why was this not flagged on intake? He said. The secondary file requires a senior clearance to access. The intake officer ran a standard check. The standard check returned only the primary file. And the ICA did not flag it. The ICA, as far as I can determine, was very glad to hand him over and very uninterested in making sure we understood what we were receiving. Draxul stood up. I want a full audit of everything in that cell. Every surface, every mounting point, every system junction within range of his extremities. I want the cell ventilation pathway mapped. I want every sensor log from the past 8 months reviewed for anomalies. Breck nodded and moved toward the door. And Breck. He stopped. Do this quietly. I do not want the prisoner to know we are reviewing anything. Breck nodded again and left without mentioning that the prisoner had, to his knowledge, already looked directly at a security camera in a way that suggested he was very much aware of being watched. Some information, Breck had decided, was better delivered in stages. The audit took 6 hours. The results took Quesel, who ran it personally at Draxul's insistence, another 2 hours to compile into something coherent, because what he found was deeply uncomfortable, and he wanted to make absolutely sure he was reading it correctly before presenting it to someone with the authority to yell at him. He was reading it correctly. He went to Draxul's office. He put the report on the desk. He stood back. Draxul read it. The cell floor sensor in Omega-7 showed 14 anomalous low-amplitude motion events over the past 6 weeks, all of them occurring within the window of the morning hull groan, all of them in the same location and direction, all of them below the alert threshold. The ventilation pathway running above cell Omega-7 had a maintenance access junction 4.2 meters from the cell ceiling, which was well outside Colt's reach, but the airflow pattern through the junction created a rhythmic pressure variation against the upper right corner of the cell wall. That corner had a panel seam. The panel seam, under 6 months of rhythmic pressure variation, had developed a hairline separation at the lower edge. The separation was 0.3 millimeters wide. Through it, if you were small enough or had something small enough, you could reach the secondary conduit housing behind the wall panel. The secondary conduit housing contained, among other things, the physical relay line for the cell's magnetic lock override. He was not testing the ankle restraint, Draxul said. No, Quesel said. We believe he was measuring the exact range of motion available at that ankle while the floor sensor was inactive, to determine whether he could reach the panel seam with something long and narrow enough to thread through it. He is chained to the wall, yes. However, the left wrist chain after the bracket replacement has more 0.7 centimeters more slack than the original installation. Standard tolerance variance. We did not think it was significant. Draxul looked up slowly. Quesil continued, because stopping now was not actually going to help anything. If the left wrist chain has 0.7 centimeters of additional slack, and the subject rotates his torso to maximum extension while using the morning hull groan to suppress the floor sensor, his left foot can reach the panel seam. Not easily. Probably with significant physical effort, but geometrically, it is possible. And if he threads something through the seam into the conduit housing, he would need something thin, conductive, and shaped to interface with the relay line without triggering the short-circuit alert, which would require either a specific tool or something fashioned to serve the same function. Draxul looked around the cell on the security feed. Bare walls, empty floor, the prisoner sitting still. He has nothing, Draxul said. He has been in there for 8 months with nothing. Questel said nothing. What? Draxul said. His meal tray, Kessel said. The standard issue alloy tray. We reviewed the logs. Over the past 4 months he has been returning his tray with the rim slightly deformed. Small deformations, consistent with a creature pressing the rim against the floor plate repeatedly. We logged it as stress behavior, restless movement, common in long-term isolation inmates. Draxul stared at him. He has been reshaping the tray rim, Questel said. Incrementally, over 4 months. We believe he now has a section of the rim that is thin enough and curved at the correct angle to thread through a 0.3 mm seam and interface with the relay junction. The silence in Draxul's office was the specific kind of silence that exists when a very confident creature is being forced to confront the possibility that they have made a very large mistake. Lock down the block, Draxul said. Replace the tray, seal the panel seam with permanent bonding compound. Move him to a different cell tonight. Which cell? Any cell without a ventilation junction within 10 meters, and get me the full ICA engineering records for his work history. Everything. I want to know what this man knows. The lockdown on Omega Block began at 1400 hours. Colt heard the additional guard boots in the corridor, heard the secondary containment doors engaged 2 sections early, heard the specific high-pitched whine of a portable bonding unit being used somewhere nearby, and understood immediately that they had found something. The question was what, exactly? He went through the possibilities methodically, the way he always did, the way his father had taught him to work through a demolitions problem. Start with what you know, identify what you do not know, assume the worst case for what you do not know, and plan accordingly. If they had found the tray modification, they had also probably found the panel seam. If they had found the panel seam, they had reviewed the sensor logs. If they had reviewed the sensor logs, they knew about the ankle rotation tests. If they knew about the ankle rotation tests, a reasonably intelligent analyst had already drawn a line connecting all of it. So, they were on to Plan 4. Colt allowed himself approximately 4 seconds of quiet frustration, because 8 weeks of incremental tray work was not nothing, and losing it stung. Then he moved on. Plan 4 was gone. That was a fact. Grieving facts was a waste of energy. Plan 7 was still intact. He was fairly confident they had not found anything related to Plan 7, because Plan 7 did not involve any physical modifications to anything in the cell, and left no evidence in any sensor log. Plan 7 was entirely in his head, and had been since month 3. Plan 7 required one thing that he did not currently have and could not manufacture, which was an opportunity created by someone else's mistake. He had been patient about Plan 7. He could keep being patient. He heard footsteps stop outside his door. The door opened. Draxul walked in, and this time he did not have the satisfied theatrical energy of his usual morning visits. He walked in the way a person walks when they are re-evaluating something important and have not yet finished the process. He looked at Colt. Colt looked back. "You know we found it," Draxul said. "I figured," Colt said. "The tray, the seam, the floor sensor pattern. You have a good analyst." Draxul was quiet for a moment. Then, and this surprised Colt slightly, he sat down on the floor. Just sat, cross-legged, the way someone sits when they have decided to have an actual conversation rather than a performance. "How many of the 17 are still viable?" Draxul asked. Colt looked at him. "Why would I tell you that?" "Because I am going to find them anyway. And because I am genuinely curious whether you have actually done what I think you have done." Draxul's voice was different now. The sarcasm was gone. The theater was gone. What was left was something that sounded remarkably like professional respect from a creature who was still absolutely intending to keep Colt imprisoned, but had stopped pretending this was a trivial situation. "You have been in a sealed cell for 8 months, chained to a wall, with a meal tray and your own mind, and you built 7 distinct escape routes." 14, Colt said. Draxul looked at him. "You found 3, Colt said. "The bracket issue, which I told you about myself because I wanted to see how fast you would respond. That gave me a measurement of your reaction time and your engineer's competence. The tray and the seam, and whatever else your audit turned up today, which I am guessing is related to the ventilation pressure pattern." He paused. "That still leaves 14. The silence that followed was extremely long. "This station," Draxul said finally, "has been running for over a century. No one has ever escaped from Omega Block." "I know," Colt said. "That is why I chose it." "You chose it." If I escape from a low-security block, nobody cares. If I escape from Omega, every prison engineer in Vethori space has to rethink their entire approach to containment design. He met Draxul's eyes without blinking. I am not trying to escape, Warden. Not exactly. I am trying to prove something. What? That you cannot contain a human being by underestimating one. Draxul sat with that for a very long moment. Then he did something that nobody on Corinth 9 had ever seen him do. He stood up. He walked to the door. He stopped. I am going to transfer you tomorrow, he said. New cell, new block, fresh installation. My best engineer will personally oversee every mounting point. Okay, Colt said. And I am going to read every single document the ICA has ever produced about your work history. That's smart, Colt said. Draxul paused at the door for a moment, 4 hands hanging at his sides, 9 feet of the most feared warden in the Vethori Accord, standing very still. Prisoner Maren, he said. Yeah, how long would it have taken you? If we had not found any of it, Colt thought about it. He could have lied. He could have said something vague and unsettling, and let Draxul carry the uncertainty with him. Instead he said, 43 days, give or take. The door sealed. In the corridor outside, Draxul stood motionless for a moment. Then he walked very quickly toward the engineering bay. He had 14 plans to find, and somewhere behind that sealed door, in the quiet of cell Omega 7, a human being sat against the wall with his eyes closed. He was already thinking about the new cell. He was already counting.